I'm Gretchen Smith, the Director of the Edisto Island Historic Preservation Society, and welcome to our third episode of the Living with History virtual tour series. Today we're at Middleton Plantation, and we're going to be talking with Stephanie and Townsend Clarkson, who will tell us about the house, and we appreciate them having us here. So let's walk inside. Good morning.
Good morning, Gretchen. Welcome to Middleton.
Thank you. Come on. Go on the porch. Townsend and Stephanie, thank you for letting us come to visit Middleton. But before we get started, I want to tell everybody a little bit about your family background and the significance of your family to the Edisto Island Museum. Your mother and father, and I didn't know your daddy, but Caroline, there were two families who were instrumental in creating the museum and the society. And the Boynos were one, and the Clarksons were another. And their names are everywhere in all the old documents. And when I first came to be the director of the museum and the society, one of the first people I met was your mother and Jack. And at least for me, it was almost love at first sight. They could not have been more charming, more endearing, kinder to me, supportive. They were great volunteers, and really had a lot to do with making us what we are today. And a number of years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, 8 years ago, we created a Volunteer of the Year award. And instead of giving it obviously to Jack and Caroline, who had married by that time, both of their spouses had died, and Jack Boyno and Caroline, your mother, married, and they were great volunteers and all they'd done in the past. But instead of presenting them the award, we named the award after them, Volunteer of the Year, the Jack and Caroline Boyno Volunteer of the Year Award. So every year in January, their legacy is recognized, so they will live on as long as the museum exists. So I want to just thank you for all that your family has done. And I will say also, Middleton has been on tour more than any other property on Edisto. And so y'all have been very, very generous with time, talent, and your home. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I know Mom and Dad and Jack both just loved Edisto and wanted to preserve as much of Edisto as they could. And well, I remember Dad working, before y'all even had that building, working with the Historical Society in order to be able to have a place for that.
Right.
And I think it meant a lot to them. So, and Mom was real proud of the award, or naming the award after them. So
well, and also a lot of the artifacts that are in the museum came from your family and the Boyno family. So their legacy is long and strong, and we are really grateful. And I personally just adored your mother and Jack, even though, as I said, I didn't know your father. But
well, thank you very much.
They were delightful and very important to us. So you want to tell us a little bit about the overall history of the property, which I think, as most people may know, extends from here all the way down, or extended all the way down to 174. And how many acres was it?
It was 850 acres.
Okay.
Close to 800.
And it was a land grant, is that?
It was a land grant to a John Whitmarsh in 1695. They granted him 300 acres. And then in 1700, they granted him another 500 acres. So it became an 800 acre parcel at that point in time. And 50 acres was added. Sometime in between there, I can't find out where that extra 50 was added, or maybe surveying wasn't as
precise
as it is today. And but it was that 850 acres stayed intact until probably the 70s, when my grandmother passed away, and then the property got divided up amongst the children. And so it's, and this house here has been, of course, this house was part of that. And they, after the Whitmarshes, the Grimbles family owned this for a number of years, and then after the Grimbles, the Evans family bought it and owned the property and farmed it for a number of years. Also, he passed away, and his wife married to Chisholm, Chisholm, and Chisholm the Chisholm family I put the Chisholm and the Evans family together because since they married,
right.
they did that. And then the Chisholms had 2 daughters, and Dr. Chisholm actually committed suicide in his house because he had an incurable disease that he didn't want to go through to the end because it was going to get pretty bad. And then he had 2 daughters, and one of the daughters passed away relatively young, but Susan Chisholm is who married Oliver Middleton. And that's sort of the name that stuck with this place,
right.
the Middleton's name. And they had it before the Civil War and through the Civil War, even though during the Civil War none of the owners were here
right.
at that time. And this was actually occupied during that time by the Union soldiers.
As were many of the plantations.
As were a lot of the plantations, correct. And then my grandfather purchased it in 1902, and it is his last day.
Was your mother born in this house?
My mother was born in his house, yes, and she was the youngest of seven children, and there was a fairly large gap between her age and the next sibling up, and so she was spoiled rotten all of her life. At least that's what she would say. She was her daddy's favorite.
Of course.
And then she had always wanted to get here, and as the property was being divided up, she eventually was able to work it out with the family that she would keep the yard, which is 12 acres, that she would keep the house in the yard and give her rights to the other her portions of the, that was about 300 acres that the house was with at that point in time. And she was able to get the house, and they started renovating it in about 1984 and moved in 1985 and lived here and worked on it for, work of love, I guess it would be.
Well, that's interesting that you say they moved here in 1985 because 1986 is when they founded the Historic Preservation Society. So it was quick.
It was quick, yeah, so that was good.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the history of our family here. We were lucky. Mom left the house to Stephanie and myself, and it's been a work of love for us also. It's something that we can leave for future generations, hopefully.
Well, let's go inside and see what you and Stephanie have done a huge amount of work inside and changed it in ways that are just fabulous, but still maintaining the history. I asked you a couple of times actually what your mom said when she came back down here because she had moved to Columbia after you had done your renovations, and tell everybody what Caroline said about the house.
We had just finished the kitchen, right, Stephanie?
She loved the kitchen. Yes.
Yeah, yes. She loved the kitchen. She did. Or was it the bathroom?
I was never real sure about the bathroom, but
well, she
changes had been made.
We had made either the bathroom renovation or the kitchen. I think it was the kitchen renovation, and she walked through and said, "Boy, I really like this," and then looked at me and said, "But it's not Middleton."
She said that about the bathroom. She always really loved the kitchen, and I think she loved the bathroom too. But she
just was different.
It's not Middleton, but anyway, she was such a dear. I mean, gosh, we just loved her to pieces, and I think she was so thrilled that we wanted to be a part of the house and wanted to do work on the house. So she never said she didn't like anything.
She never said a word. She never disagreed. Criticized what we had done.
It wasn't in her nature.
No, it was not. She was the lady of Edisto.
Oh yeah. And when she and Jack would volunteer often, regularly, they had a post as docents at the museum, and people loved to come when they were there because they were so steeped in the history. And Jack in particular knew everything, and I used to always accuse him of making stuff up because he just seemed to know a huge amount of information. But I also said, who would dare challenge you?
That's right.
And that would challenge Jack going up.
Exactly.
So they were delightful.
He did so much to this, to make this house special.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. He was a great man. He and Mom were,
they were perfect
They
together.
were a perfect couple for sure. And like to follow in their footsteps. I'm not as smart as either one of them, so I'm not gonna be able to do that.
You're not bad. All right, shall we go inside?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, this is the entranceway from the main front of the house, and also an entranceway from the back of the house. And the house is what's called a Greek Revival style, and it also has a lot of Robert Mills influence in this house. And he developed or designed a number of homes in South Carolina and a number of facilities in Washington, D.C. Some say that he designed this home, others say that that's not the case, but whoever did it definitely had his style, which has a lot of symmetry, which we will see in other rooms that we go into. What I think is probably the unique thing about this room here is the stairwell, and this stairwell was the only curved stairwell on Edisto Island, and this is all original, and none of that's been replaced. The only addition to this has been, you can't see it here, but maybe they'll get a close-up picture of it, is a piece of round ivory, which Jack Bueno asked if I collected knives, and I had knife makers make knives for me, and a lot of them I had made with ivory handles, so I would buy ivory in slabs, so I'd give them the ivory, and they would make the knife handles. He asked me for a slab of it one year, and I gave it to him, not knowing what it was for, and it came back about 3 months later, and he had taken that and cut it into a circle and put grooves around it, symmetrical grooves around it, and he showed it to me, and it's right here, and he says that's just an old tradition that when you pay off the mortgage of a home, which Mom had paid off the mortgage the year before, that you put that in the stairwell, and that's was the significant point of this here, but I thought that was pretty unique. The house lays out, we're in the section we're in now is 12.5-foot ceilings, and this, known as the parlor on my right, and what was known as the sitting room on my left, are all 12.5-foot ceilings. And then if you go further on my right, then we go into the den and to the kitchen. And if you go further to my left, you go into the master bedroom and the bath. Upstairs from here, there were 2 bedrooms, or there are 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. And downstairs from here on the bottom floor are 2 dens and a bedroom and the laundry. Well, welcome to the parlor. This is where my grandmother and other relatives would have their formal discussions, I would say. This is where they would sit and talk when family and friends would come. And this is different than the sitting room. The sitting room was more where the family would go in and sit and read or do whatever. And this we had converted into the dining room now, and made what was the dining room into another den. One of the unique things of this room is this table here. This table was made by Jack Bueno for my mother, Caroline, and Jack was a master wood craftsman. He could do the most beautiful inlays and woodwork of almost anybody I've ever seen. So he got the wood and literally built this table for my mother. Other aspects of this room are, we talked a little bit in the foyer as we came in about Robert Mills and the symmetry that you have in the house. And if you notice the door behind us and the door leading into the den, actually the door behind us is not a real door. It doesn't open and it doesn't have a closet inside or go to another room. It's there to just give this room symmetry. Another really, I think, very interesting part of this aspect of this room is the wallpaper. This is thought to have been some of the first French block wallpaper to come over from Europe during the 17 and 1800s. And this wallpaper, when I was little, was peeling off the walls. It was very aged and stained. And my mother, working through a designer in Charleston, was able to get one of the owners from the Scalamander company who produced wallpaper to come out here and take a look at it. And he liked it so much that he took portions of it back and created a wallpaper, reproduced this wallpaper. And if you go to the Scalamander's catalog, you'll see that this pattern that's in there is called Middleton's parlor. And so after that, the representative from Scalamander hired a restorer from Somerville and had them come in and completely do this room with this new wallpaper. If you would like to see, if you look over into the corner over there in that tall, like 7-foot frame, there is an original section of the wallpaper that they had framed and presented to my mother also. I think one of the interesting pieces of furniture in this room is this desk. Most of the furniture you see in this room is period furniture, so it would be furniture that was built or utilized during the period that this house was constructed. This here is an old desk from my great-grandfather, Dr. Daniel Townsend Pope, and he used that desk and passed it on down the family, and we were lucky to have it here. Stephanie, is there anything else you think? Oh, I do think there's one other thing. If you look at the around the baseboards, you'll see that it looks like marble, and these baseboards are actually painted to look like marble and are called marbleized baseboards, but they're actually of wood, but it's very intricate and I think really adds a lot to this room. This room here used to be the dining room, and as you saw in our previous room we were in, we relocated the dining room from this room into what was the parlor because we wanted to get a gathering area close to the kitchen. What we did in this room is this was a solid wall here, and we had that opened up so we could have a view looking both ways and also to add more light to this room. The furniture in here, as you can see, is mostly modern. We put most of this furniture in here when we developed it as a den. Other than there is this unique piece of furniture over here made of mahogany that Jack found and refinished for my mother. And what's unique about it is it has swirls in it that look like plum pudding. And that's what it's called, is plum pudding walnut. And very unique, very, very unique, and hard to find pieces of wood like that to generate that kind of pattern. Our room next to us that we're looking at is the kitchen. And Stephanie and I remodeled this kitchen when was that, Stephanie, you remember?
2014.
2014. And that kitchen, original to the house, was a holding room. Most of the families, or most of the homes back in the 1700s and 1800s did not have fireplace or did not cook the food in the house for fear of fire. And that was originally the holding room. And they would cook, at one point in time, they would do most of the cooking over in the building that we call the cotton house, which you could see outside of this window, which was the kitchen and the laundry at one time. And so this is where we spend a good bit of our time when the family comes. They like to be close to the kitchen and the food, and they spend a good bit of their time.
As I recall, when your mom was here, this was dark wood, was it not? I mean, this was a dark room, very closed off and dark. It was one of your goals to open everything up.
She had that made out of heart pine.
Yeah.
And it was very dark.
It's beautiful.
It was dark, yeah.
And our goal was to try to lighten this area up a little bit.
Were these windows here? I don't remember.
Those windows were there.
Okay, so
those. I don't know if one point in time that window was a little bit longer. It looks like it was, and they cut it in order to get the sinks, the original sinks and so forth in there. But those windows are original. If you look at the glass, probably over half the glass in this house is of original or that period, because you can see the swirls in the glass and done that.
Actually, Jim and Linda McLean were the ones that did the kitchen. Doors that are here on that estate.
You really have opened it up.
And
she was wonderful.
She was absolutely, we walked in there with her and said, we want to do something to upgrade the kitchen.
We don't know what.
And we don't know what. And she walked in and walked around for about 2 minutes and says, I know exactly what you want in here. And they took it, and it was, I must say, it was probably the easiest and best construction project that I have ever had done.
And that's not always true in an old house.
It is, right? It is true. So, yeah, you have nothing in an old house that's square. And you have no plans of what's behind it. So, we are still in the den adjacent to the kitchen, but I did want to show you one unique thing that Jack found in the county courthouse. And this was an original plat of the property dated 1796 that he made a copy of and colored the marsh green and the land of the property in the yellow, but the date of this map is 1796. And if you look closely at it, right at the bend of Store Creek, right behind the house, they have a picture of a house. And that's one of the theories, that the house was built prior to 1815, which we think is when it was built. But we've come to the conclusion that this house that's shown here was actually the Cotton House, which is adjacent to us here, which would have been pretty standard in that time, that you would have a small home that the owner would come to oversee the property for a few weeks, or have a home that the caretaker for the property stayed in. That house has wainscoting and has horsehair plaster throughout, and so don't think that that was used for help. I do think that may have been where they came and stayed when they, not permanently, but when they had to address stuff at the local plantation. This here is what was known as the sitting room, or what we addressed to earlier as the sitting room. It was used more for informal greetings, or for reading, or just for family to get together for talks and discussions. As I grew up, or when I was growing up, this room was actually our grandmother's bedroom, and for a long period of time she stayed and slept in this room until she moved to Columbia to live with us. I think some of the unique things about this room are Jack Bueno loved genealogy, and for Christmas one year he gave the family his research and genealogy of both the Pope family and the Clarkson family. We had those framed and put up on the wall in front of us here. In addition, he had a warehouse full of old furniture that he would work on periodically to restore. And when Hugo came, he was lucky it didn't get damaged, but they did blow off some of the tin, and there was one location in there that had water intrusion. And that water went on to what we called a planter's desk, but It's a tall desk, oak desk, and it had stained the wood. And he asked me if I wanted that piece, and of course I did. I took that and had it redone, and that's the planner's desk that you see over on underneath the genealogy charts. My mother was, as indicated earlier, the youngest of the children, and her job was to bring in the sheep to get sheared. She would take the horse out and round up the sheep and bring them in, and she absolutely loved sheep. And Jack, knowing that, ended up purchasing this picture of a bunch of sheep and gave it to her, and it's been on the wall since then. Another piece of interesting furniture that we have in this room is this camphor desk. This camphor desk is like a cedar chest, but it's a little more protective of the material in there, and was used a lot on ships because it didn't decay as did cedar wood. And they use these to store linens and blankets and other stuff that they were trying to protect. This piece here is probably 200 to 300 years old. Anything else? You can, one other thing is you'll notice in this room, as with the Adams style, there are 2 doors for symmetry here. But again, this is a fake door. It doesn't lead to anywhere. It doesn't open or do anything. We are now in the master bedroom where my grandfather slept. And this room, the bed in this room is not his bed. We moved that upstairs and moved one of the beds that was upstairs down here because it was like 4 inches longer, gave us a little more room. But this room is unique in the fact that, well, the furniture in this room is unique. In fact, this was my grandmother's dresser, and it disappeared. And my mother then found it in the basement in 9 pieces. And she pulled it out of the basement and had all the pieces other than 2. And Jack restored this piece of furniture and rebuilt the 2 pieces that were missing in that. I think probably the most unique character assets of this room is if you look at the pane in the window over there, it has,
Yep.
It has an etching in it, which if you look at it right here is MM 1848. And that is Mary Middleton with her engagement ring or a diamond ring, carved her initials in that, and that's still in that pane of glass there. The floors in here, like the floors in the rest of the house, this floor and the one upstairs, are all original. We were very lucky that this house had been as well maintained as it was, and also lucky that storm damage that had incurred here had not torn down or damaged this house or the Cotton House. And the remainder of the buildings, which when Mom was growing up here, there were 22 buildings in this 12-acre yard. Those consisted of a windmill, a cotton gin, 4 or 5 laborer homes, barns, storage buildings, and so forth. And when Gracie was here, which I think was 59, the hurricane of 59, blew everything down other than the house, the Cotton House, and the doctor's office that you can see outside this window. The room adjacent to us here is the bathroom. They believe this was probably the nursery originally, and my grandfather did practice medicine out of that room for a short period of time, but then converted the building out here, the stucco building that was out here, to his medical office, and turned it into a bathroom. And when he converted it and brought in the indoor bathroom, he also had a windmill, built a windmill, and that windmill pumped the water from the well to the bathroom and to the kitchen. upstairs, and as mentioned earlier, there were 2 bedrooms upstairs. There was a pink room at that point in time when I was growing up. That was the girls' room, and there was a blue room, which was the boys' room. We've changed the color of this room, but this used to be the girls' room, and all of the girls slept here, and all the boys slept in the other room. Early on growing up here, we didn't have any bathroom. You had this bedroom, what is known as the trunk room, where they stored stuff, and then the other bedroom. So we had chamber pots here, and my grandmother got tired of us running up and down the stairs, so she put a bathroom up here, which was in one of those, in that closet. I'm sorry, which was in that closet. And so that made us all happy that we didn't have to take our chamber pots down every morning. And but this bed that's behind us, this was our grandfather's bed that was down in the master bedroom while he was here. And the trunk that's in the room was a trunk that almost all of the Pope children used to take to college when they went to school. They'd load that heavy thing up and I guess put it on a wagon and head to school. This room to my left is what is now the bathroom, but was originally known as the trunk room and used for storage. My mother, when they came in and remodeled the home, converted this into a bathroom and had a claw leg tub in there and a toilet, but allowed at least the people upstairs to have a bathroom to go to. One thing in this room was it had the only access to the attic. And to get to that, there was a 10-foot ladder that led up to the covered hole up there. And adjacent to that covered hole and around it was red paint. And as we were growing up, my older cousins and so forth told us that it was blood. So it was a room that we didn't like to go into at all back then. But right at the top of the ladder was this smear of red paint that they called it, said it was blood. We are now in the blue room, which was the boys' room, and I think one thing I forgot to mention when we were in the last room is that actually the best views in the house are from these upstairs rooms overlooking the river and overlooking the marsh. The bed that we see in this room was my grandmother's bed, and she had given that to my aunt, and my aunt passed it on to her daughter Shan. And last year, Shan sent me a note and said that she was relocating and moving to a smaller place, and her children didn't want the bed and thought that it should come back to the house. So we had the bed and the dresser and the washboard all put back into brought back to the house and put it in this room. We used to have in here a campaign bed, which was a bed that the officers used to use during wartime periods that they would take out into the field. That was really a nice bed, but it came apart real easy and was able to be stored and then put back together in the fields and in the tents. What I like about this room the most was I used to have a rocking chair in here, and my boys would sleep up here. And you open up the windows in the spring or fall, and it would get some good cool air in here. And during the night, the cradle would start. Did I say? I may have said rocking chair, but cradle's what I meant. Right. The cradle would just start rocking by itself, and it scared those boys to death because you had a cradle rocking, and you had this picture that's on the wall of a boy sleeping on sort of a bench, and this ghost hovering above him. And to this day, and my boys are 40, 45 years old, to this day, the boys rush into the house to not to have to stay in this room, to claim another room other than being in here. The haunted room.
as you know, one of the themes of this virtual tour is how people adapt the older houses to modern living, and to me the basement is the most extreme case of doing that, so and just did it incredibly well. So if you could talk about what it used to be, and I remember when it was like that when your mother was here, and what you transformed it into, and the challenges that y'all had to face and overcome.
Certainly, would love to do that. Well, we are now in the basement of the house, and the first floor of this house was made entirely of brick, and that was the foundation upon which the main living portion of the house was built on, which of course was all wood, most of that heart of pine wood, which is what they built with back then. We're now sort of in the foyer, and you have an entranceway coming off the back of the back patio that came into here. And when I was young, this was all used for storage. Every one of these rooms were packed full of just stuff. Mom was a pack rat for sure, but we had stuff here everywhere. And our first task here was to try to get rid of all the stuff that was down in the basement, which took us probably a year or two to get to clean.
Or maybe call it relocating.
Getting rid of it.
Relocating. It was
because we found some treasures too.
Yeah, but you
did.
did.
That's true. Relocating is probably a better word for it. But down here we had basically to my right was the laundry room, or storage room, excuse me. And then right in front of that, going out toward the water, was the commissary where they kept all their canned goods. And then to my left off of this room was, currently when I was growing up, it was a storage room also. But my mother told me that it was actually where they had guest stay, which made sense because it has a fireplace in it. Mm-hmm. There are actually 7 fireplaces in this house, 1 in each bedroom, and also 1 in the den, 1 in the sitting room, and 1 in the parlor. So they had 7 fireplaces leaving them here. We have 2 of them that are working, and trying to get 2 additional ones working as soon as we can find a gas source that goes to it. But I'd like to show you what we now call Stephanie's room, but which is our room to my left that has been renovated. So this is now what we call Stephanie's room, and one thing that these old houses had that was a challenge to anybody living in them full time nowadays is that there was very little closet room in each bedroom. Most of them used wardrobes, but that was fairly limited too. In this room here, we turned into more of a enclosed closet area with
Oh, your closet space too.
my closet's in here also, where we keep our clothing that we don't keep up in the bedroom in those small closets. But the floor in this room is original, and as you can notice in here, there's also a fireplace. I've never seen this fireplace operational, but because of the chances of fire through the chimney, but this was a living place at one point in time. And if you'll notice the ceiling, you'll see that we took down the horsehair plaster where it was held up with the slats, board slats, and you see the nail holes. But we exposed all of those and then had insulation lighting in the ceiling put in the last 4 inches before the floor upstairs. When I was a young kid and you'd come down in here, we're actually right below the parlor. You could hear everything anybody was saying in the parlor upstairs. There was no muffling of sound whatsoever. But this has been a very useful room, and Stephanie uses it almost every night to sit and work or do whatever.
Transformation.
I'm right now standing in our storage room, but this will give you an idea of what the whole basement looked like prior to us being able to rearrange it and remodel it into something a little more livable. Just she won't let my dogs go upstairs, so I spend my time and my
Down here
dog's
with
time
them.
downstairs. We are now still in the basement, but this is, quote, my room. So I can do anything in this room I want to. So my dogs and I will sit here in the evenings and have a little bourbon and watch TV. But this here used to be the commissary, and we, in order to expose the full archway here, we moved this wall over a little bit enough to do that. And what we did was we turned the archway, the interior of the archway, into a wine cabinet. And our contractor at that time had his wood craftsman actually take wood from other portions of the house where we were getting rid of because parts of it may have been rotted or broken. And he crafted actually a wine cellar in there, had them build an archway door for it, and enter a cooling system in there to keep them at a constant temperature. I like this room. As you can see, it's sort of decorated for a man, but it's one of my favorite places of the house. My mother was a Depression child, so growing up during that period of time, they learned to save everything. And as discussed, there was just a tremendous amount of things, I won't call it junk, things stored here, but you couldn't just throw away or relocate a pile of it. You had to go through each piece because you may go through 10 pages of just old blank paper, and then underneath that may be some history of the house or some letter dated back to the 1700s. One thing we did find when we were going through all this stuff was 3 Confederate dollar bills, a 20, a 10, and a 5. And we were lucky not to have thrown those out and framed them and put them up in the room. Again, we're still in the basement. This room, again, when I was growing up, was called the wood room. And that's where they stored firewood. The floor actually here, this is the only room in the basement that doesn't have original floor because this floor here was just dirt. I do believe at one point in time that it was brick, but they probably tore up these bricks to move, to fix or repair or patch other places on the property. This room was nothing in it, a little bit of junk as far as furniture, old furniture and so forth. But we took this and extended it. It didn't extend out to the end of the house walls, so we extended this room probably about 8 to 10 feet, and then enclosed, all the archways were open, and we enclosed the archways and added a door going out to the patio. And we used this as a guest room. And almost everybody that comes here wants to stay here because included in here, of course, is the bourbon room next door. It has its own bathroom and shower and 2 vanities, so it gives them a place to come down and escape and get away from the rest of the people whenever they need to. Again, as you can see, the rafters have been exposed, and as usual, they all were covered with these. Ceiling was a plaster ceiling. One of the challenges in this room was where to put the water closet. The room just didn't set up very well for a water closet. We're lucky our contractor came in.
And Charles did a great job.
Designs by Cindy, but Cindy came in and actually built a bathroom out of, or a water room out of a corner by just shaping in some new walls there. We also have back here, you'll have 2 sinks, a his and a her sink, and then a walk-in shower. We are now at what we have called, or has been known as, the Cotton House. And as I was growing up, this was used as just a storage building and a workshop, and was in pretty bad state of repair. It was at one point in time it was falling down, and my mother had somebody come in here with a big piece of heavy equipment and literally push it back up and put wedges or so forth underneath it. And then about, when did we redo this? 85? 2005, when we we're here, we noticed the house was starting to fall again, and I brought in a contractor, the same one that did a lot of work in the main house afterwards, to help straighten it up. And as they started working on it, Stephanie and I decided that we just wanted to completely renovate this house. And we believe it was actually the first building on the place. As mentioned earlier, I think it's where either the owner of the property came and stayed temporarily while he was evaluating the farming on the place, and so it was used as a residence. And then after that, it was used as a kitchen and a laundry, and then used as a storeroom. And we've turned it now into what we call the guest cottage. It's what you'll see over here to my right is the old bell. This old bell used to be off of the back porch, and is what my grandmother and all would ring during the middle of the day to call everybody in from the field to have lunch or dinner. And we put it up there, and those posts and so forth that are on it are parts of this house that we couldn't reincorporate into it.
So Townsend, you call this the cotton house? Why is that?
It was called the cotton house because when Mom was little, they used to store cotton in it.
Okay.
After they harvested the cotton, they would store that, bring it over here in big bales, and you had a double window up here that you could haul the bales up into that, and they stored them up there.
Would that have been a loft?
It was a
Upstairs?
loft upstairs.
Okay.
And when we go inside, we'll see portions of that lift and where they would bring them in from.
Okay.
We're now inside the cotton house, and as I indicated earlier, during its latter phases was used just as storage in a workshop, but it was in a pretty bad state of disrepair. So Stephanie and I wanted to fix this up into a guest cottage, and actually we stayed here while Mom and Jack were living over at the house if we came down for the weekends. But we pulled all of the siding off of it, we pulled the roof off of it, we took up all the floor and replaced some of the main beams that were along the floor supporting the house. We've had to replace a number of these cross beams up here. You can tell which ones these are. This has no nail holes in it, but the nail holes that you find in these others are the original joist for the house.
We had enough wood to make the bottom.
Yeah, what wood that we took off that we could reuse, we actually built it or brought it back in, and the floor, we had enough wood to do the floor here, the floor going up the steps, but not enough to do the floor that was in what would have been the attic of this building that had additional storage in it. So most of the furniture in this building came from the basement of the big house that we had redone. Some of it was actual furniture within the main house. This is actually a reclining chair with a pull-out footstool on it, and this was my grandfather's. And if he came in the room and you were sitting in that chair, you'd better get out of it quick or you're going to get popped. Something unique here is this table, and found that in the basement also. Wasn't sure what was in it, and so I started to open it up, and it was actually the sort of green colored canning jars, and it was still full of all the canning jars and all the sawdust used for packing, and the newspapers on top to hold the sawdust in. So I closed it back up and just put together a little table for in this room.
So that was a shipping container?
That was a shipping container that they
Nice one.
This was one of the trunks that was in the basement from operating from the house, and it was in the basement. And the table and chairs that were used for dining was also in there. And either, depending on what period of time it was, I either restored it or had these things restored. Something that we haven't been able to figure out what they were are these hooks, and they go across this entire beam, and not sure if that was just to put stuff on or to hang meat. Typically you didn't hang meat too much in the South because it was too warm. But this building had, reason we think that the caretakers and or the owners were in here, because this building had wainscoting in it, and all of these rafters had horsehair plaster on them, and so they wouldn't have typically done that for a normal storage room. We added a bathroom here. This actually going up this way was how the stairwell went up originally, with no banisters or anything on them. You just walked upstairs, and that you almost walked up it and then you stepped on the floor, stepped to the side to get to the floor. We had architect John Haley come in here and redesign this for us so we could actually use it as a guest cottage or a place for us to stay. Leave anything out? Oh, Stephanie and I would come here every weekend and start cleaning things out, and literally had a major dumpster outside, and we would go to the windows or upstairs and just throw stuff down in there. Well, after we left, every night Mom would come and dig through that dumpster to find out what we had thrown away, to make sure we had thrown away something good. And we're glad she did that, because as we got to the top floor and started cleaning out, there were a lot of burlap bags just hanging from the ceiling. Most of them were rotten, so we just grabbed a group of those burlap bags and just threw them down into the dumpster from the window upstairs. To come back a week later, Mom had climbed through there and gone through all of those bags, and she actually found about 8 of these bags that you see right here, which are from my grandfather, and they're bags that when they harvest potatoes, that they shipped them in. And it actually says South Carolina potatoes, Middleton's Farm, Dr. J.M. Pope. And we are real glad that she was able to save those for us. We are now upstairs of the cotton house, and as you'll notice, the ceiling was not real tall in this room, so if you were much over 6 feet, 6'3", you pretty much had to duck all the way in here. But as we looked at what to do with the upstairs, we kicked back and forth of whether we wanted this to be a 2-bedroom or a 1-bedroom loft. Decided that we'd rather be alone, and made it a 1-bedroom loft. But we have included in here, one item here is an old ice chest that was found in the basement of Middleton's, that is actually made of oak. It has a tin lining, and in between the tin and the oak is sawdust that they use for insulation. And what they did with that ice chest is they would have big blocks, 500-pound or more weight blocks of ice brought to the house. They had a hole in the yard that had a lot of sawdust in it, and they would put the blocks of ice in there and then cover that up with more sawdust. And as they needed ice, they'd come chip it off and then rinse the ice. This is where they put the ice once they chipped it off, and also to help keep other things refrigerated and cooled. This is another reclining chair that came from the house, and the bed, the gates that are used on the bed for its headboard actually came from London, but they're the same period of time in the late 1700s or early 1800s when they were built. One point, the reason this was called the cotton house was this used to be open like the loft of a barn, and with wooden doors that opened and closed. Had a pulley system attached to it, and what they would do was this would go out of that window, and they would haul up the bales of cotton and then store them in here till they had enough that they would ship.
hope you've enjoyed this Christmas tour of Middleton Plantation, and thank you to Stephanie and Townsend for letting us be here, and to Dixie and Georgia, and Merry Christmas to everyone.
Well, Gretchen, thank you for allowing us to share our home with you and with everybody with the Historical Society.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.